Well, wasn't that arty, Dave?
Wow, look at the quality images I can make of a pile of burning grapevines.
Yeah, I mean, that's what pulled me into this conversation with you. I saw that and I thought, whoa, what's Dave doing burning in his backyard? It's a big backyard you've got there.
My big backyard. Yeah, it was, and we'll get to it. What we were doing is producing something called biochar, which is one of the things we're working on in our vineyard in the pre-rat, and it's part of something called regenerative agriculture. But first off, Harriet, lovely to see you. Thank you for having me on your show. It's been a while since we've seen each other. A year ago in Madrid, we were last together.
Yeah, we had good fun in Madrid, and this is like our anniversary meetup, except it's a little bit more serious. There's no wine tasting involved. There's no good food. We're just talking about regenerative agriculture. I got the word right. There we go. So welcome. I have David Fora here, a master of wine. He pretends he's Spanish, but he's actually Canadian, though I thought he was American when I first met him.
Careful now, careful.
Yeah. So Dave, tell us a little bit about how, first of all, you became a master of wine, just in a sentence. Second of all, how you're now living in Priorat, or in Barcelona, and going to Priorat and growing grapes, making wine, and burning vine prunings, from what I can tell.
Well, becoming a master of wine is easy. We had moved to San Francisco, and being surrounded by the wine country there, I fell even more in love with wine and decided that, maybe I should just become a master of wine, with this naive thought and suggestion. And 10 years later of hard work, I became one. And that coincided with the desire in our family to have a new adventure in life, and gave me an opportunity to think, maybe we could live in the old world of vineyards and where the origins of the world's greatest wines are. And so we moved to Barcelona about 4 years ago, and it's been fantastic. It's lovely here. Of course, it's Barcelona. Who doesn't love Barcelona? And never thought of buying a vineyard and producing wine. But serendipity sort of happened. Got sucked into it. A good friend of mine, Frank Massard, who's been making wine, a Frenchman who's been making wine here in Spain for a long time, said, hey, this vineyard's come up for sale. Vineyards don't really come up for sale in the Priorat. It was a friend of a friend, and we went out one wintry day in the snow, believe it or not, almost 4 years ago, and took a look at it, and I fell in love with this magical place, the magical place of the Priorat, but then also of this specific vineyard. And even though I never intended to buy a vineyard and start producing wine, the wines of the Priorat are my kind of wines. They're big, bold, rich, but they're also
not subtle and delicate and fragrant.
I'm subtle and delicate, Harriet. I would actually say Priorat wines are high in acid. I don't know if that's me, maybe,
spiky,
but spiky and have a good perfume. So that's sort of how we bought this vineyard and started producing wine. And as Harriet, you're a master of wine. I thought, I became a master of wine. I thought, I know something about wine. Mm. But then you buy a vineyard and you realize you don't know anything. And so it's been a great experience immersing myself into this crazy world of growing a crop, because it's farming, and then taking that crop and producing wine, and re-examining all of my preconceived notions about what was the best way to farm and how should we farm. We went into it with this idea of real conscious effort on sustainability. Mm. And sustainability for me has sustainability of the land. So you have to be taking care of the land. You have to take care of the economics. So you can't work in a way that, your workers aren't making money, or your customers are overpaying, or, everything has to work economically that you can actually sell the wine. And the third is taking care of the community. And so we concentrate on the last two, but today let's talk about the first one. Am I talking too much, Harriet?
You're not talking too much. I'm actually taking notes because you're actually being interesting. It is what was interesting. What I picked up on the last bit of sustainability was the community part, and that's what a lot of people forget about, and that's really important. So, you know, I think that's another chat. I think today we're going to focus on regenerative agriculture and the biochar, the burning that we saw in the vineyards, right, and why that interested me. I actually looked up a definition, Dave, so I wouldn't be completely behind everyone on this. And the definition that I found, which is quite straightforward, was that it's an effective method of carbon sequestration that captures and holds carbon for hundreds of years. And I mean, if you know anything about global warming and climate change, that's got to be a good thing, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that we'll get to the carbon sequestration, but I first want to describe where does regenerative agriculture fit in with the other buzzwordy aspects of farming. So as we know, after the Second World War, there was a massive amount of opportunity to provide chemicals that had gone into munitions. They started going into the ground, chemical fertilizer, chemical, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all that sort of stuff. And there was a pushback against that with the organic movement, meaning let's not put these synthetic chemicals into our land that destroy the microorganisms that are in the ground. Stuff like Roundup, stuff not all of us hate, but I certainly hate to death.
This is the buzzword, isn't it? It's the microorganisms in the soil. That's how we're going to be living for the next million years. That's how we're going to save our planet. It's not about anything. Well, that is the main focus, I think, isn't it?
Yes, I absolutely. That and that carbon sequestration, and those two go together. So there's the organic movement, which is about what products you put into your land, what inputs you have, and taking away some of that agribusiness chemicals that get dumped on the majority of farmland in the world. Then there's biodynamics, which is, hey, let's go a step further and take care of the land in a holistic way. And there's some aspects of biodynamics that I really like, and we follow some of them. Some that I think are sort of hocus pocus, and grinding up this and throwing manure into a cow horn at the end of the field. That seems crazy, but some of it makes sense, and some of it applies to regenerative agriculture. Manure that you put into the vineyard or into your field at the end of the row, let it sort of rot in there a little bit, and then you make a tea out of it and spray it everywhere. That's about spreading microorganisms around your vineyard in a way to increase your microbial activity within the soil. So anyway, we've got conventional agriculture, Roundup and all that stuff.
I'm gonna interrupt you, Dave, because this completely goes against your past as a pharmacist. I mean, like, you have gone full circle now. You're going to be growing your hair soon and sort of, wandering around spraying raw manure onto the field.
You gotta get my plaid shirt and suspenders on. And
yeah, totally. Exactly. You get your goats following you, and you can have some of my pigs actually.
Now, it's true. So I had a previous life in the pharmaceutical business developing drugs for cancer. I was a statistician, so I looked at the numbers. I analyzed the data. That hasn't gone away. And I'm a deeply non-religious person. I'm a deeply non-culty, I need to follow biodynamics and start grinding my quartz myself or crystals. I'm not going to be wearing a crystal on I'm about the data. I'm about figuring out what we need to do to satisfy our goals as a vineyard. So on those three aspects of sustainability, and also figure out, well, what should we be doing for the world's benefit? And so I don't do anything just because it sounds good. I do it because the data show that it works and that it satisfies my goals. In my place, in the Priorat, we have a different goal for regenerative agriculture than somebody in the Jura or the Loire or Napa. And so we're going to adapt our processes for what makes sense. But let's jump into that. So you've got conventional, you've got organic, you got, wearing crystal biodynamics, which parts of it I like. But it's the tenets of organics and biodynamics about taking care of the soil is part of what regenerative agriculture is about. And before we talk about regenerative agriculture, I'm going to talk a little bit about carbon. Why are our carbon levels going up in the world? Well, because we're taking carbon that's deep in the ground in a form of oil and coal and all that stuff from fossil fuels, which is millions of years old, and all we're doing is releasing it into the sky. Okay, that's mathematics. You're taking stuff that's sequestered, you're putting it up. That's why our carbon levels spike up. So everybody says, well, plant a tree. Plants are great because they suck carbon out of the sky, and they grow plants out of it.
Pull it back. Yeah.
A plant here, I'm going to blow your mind. A plant is carbon neutral. It doesn't help the environment at all, unless it takes that carbon and it holds that carbon for a long time. It will eventually get back into the atmosphere, in another million years, when the next set of humans are on the earth and they start pulling the carbon that from the trees that we have now back up and burning it. It'll get released. But a tree sequesters carbon in the form of its trunk and in its roots. But for example, you have a wood burning fireplace, you've cut down a tree, you put that wood in your fireplace, all you're doing is you're taking that carbon that the tree has sequestered over tens of years and putting it back in the sky.
Yeah.
A plant that you harvest every year is carbon neutral. It doesn't help the environment at all. And so this blew my mind. I thought I understood climate change and carbon. We need to take the carbon that's in the atmosphere and put it back in the ground. We have to sequester it. That. Of course, we have to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we're burning, but we have to sequester the carbon that's in the environment and put it down. So that's part of the goal of regenerative agriculture, is this pulling of carbon out of the sky and sequestering it in the ground.
This is where biochar comes in, isn't it, Dave?
Yes.
So I'm going to actually share my screen again, and I'm going to show a video of the process that you had on YouTube or Instagram that caught my attention last week. So I'm going to play this now. Here we go. There we go. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and go back. So do you want me to go back to bits of that, or?
No, that's okay. I think people caught what the guy was doing. He was in full protective clothes, taking vine cuttings and putting them into a big, looks like a huge oil drum, and burning it. Let's talk for a second about viticulture. In the winter, you prune, so you cut off a vine, okay? Now if you've got a vineyard, you got a whole huge pile of vines. What do you do with it? Well, in some regions, it gets collected and it gets turned into compost. Great. That makes the plant carbon neutral, because by turning it into compost, you've released almost all of the carbon back into the environment. Some of it stays in micronutrients, it comes back into the soil. But many places, Apriorad included, just take those vine cuttings in a vineyard, they make some piles as appropriate and light them on fire. The carbon goes straight back into the environment, and that pile turns into ash. This is important. Pile of vine cuttings ends up as ash. What we're doing with the biochar is different. We've got this drum, we start a fire, we start piling it up. As soon as this temperature spikes, they put another layer, like that guy was doing, of vines on top, sort of smothers it and brings the temperature down. As soon as it comes back, smother it and put it back down. The goal, yeah, go ahead.
Is what I was reading about, which fascinated me, was the fact that it needs to be quite hot, and the smoke doesn't actually escape as such. A lot of it is reburnt, and that's why you're not putting carbon back in the atmosphere. Is that right?
Carbon and the toxicity. So when you're making charcoal for your barbecue, that's a different process. It's a lower temperature. I don't know if it's a lower or higher temperature. I think it's lower. Anyway, there's more toxins are released. You still end up with a carbonized piece of wood that's great for your barbecue and gives a nice, high temperature and all that kind of stuff. It's a slightly different process. What we're doing is we're getting the temperature in that bin, trying to keep it around 400 Celsius,
Pretty
not
hot.
Fahrenheit, Celsius.
Yeah.
And we get heat spikes around the edges because you've got to try and, inside, outside is different temperatures. And we were using one of those infrared guns, and it was getting to 700 degrees Celsius. That's really hot. And that's why the guy's wearing firefighters hat and the goggles and all that sort of stuff. So we'll talk about this process of biochar. Rather than burning it, you're doing this process and you keep smothering and smothering and smothering it. And eventually it's full, that bin. And you go, okay, ready? Throw some water on it. And it cools it down. You open it up, you spread it out, you cool it down, and you end up with these little pieces of vines that look like little pieces of charcoal. And you go, okay, well, whatever, what are you going to do with that? That charcoal has some special properties. It's porous, it can retain water, which is good, and it helps with acidity. There's something called cation exchange and buffering and that kind of thing. But really what you've got is, if you look at it at a microscopic level, this piece of charcoal is filled with little holes. So it creates a habitat for microorganisms. And so we take these big piles, and we're talking hundreds of kilos of little bits of charcoal. We take it to our compost, we mix it in, and we have 6 hectares. We use about 24 tons of compost a year to enrich our soil. You mix it in, and the microorganisms start attaching to that biochar, to those little pieces of carbon. You put it in the soil, and it enhances the ability of the microorganisms to stay in the soil, not to get washed away by any rain. And it has so many benefits. And this is not hocus pocus, we're in a crystal. This is science proven benefits. And you're just putting that carbon that the vine captured from the air into the soil, where it'll last up to 2,000 years.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. And you know, the thing that amazed me is how simple it is, apart from the heat, obviously, and how you can apply it to any agriculture, because here we have fields and horses, and so we have manure, and we have woods, so we can do it here. We can all do it all over the world. And I did a little bit of research into it in Ireland, and there's Biochar Ireland, which is an association, and they were talking about it since like 2017. And no one's really pulled up on it. My brother, he does a load of he's basically turned his hand to farming, and farming in a sustainable way. And he didn't know very much about it. I think we need to get word out there that this is a really effective way to sequester carbon and to fertilize your land. And it also fixes nitrogen into the soil as well, doesn't it? And reduces the acidity of the soil. I did my homework, and all these things, and also adds to the sort of the texture of the soil. Doesn't, you know, gives it more of a sort of, well, I suppose that's the humus that does that with the manure, but it's really exciting. And you sent me a link saying, and you can feed it to pigs. And I was just like, whoa, was it you? I think it was you.
Yeah.
And I just thought, this is brilliant. I'm, you know, we've got to thin our woods this year, and we have a turnaround. And this is my #1 plan, to do this in Ireland for our fields. And I think, you know, you're doing it in your vineyards. If I start doing it in my fields, get my neighbors to share in the activity, make it I saw there's a group of people there doing it, you know, we can get everyone involved in it and really start to sequester this carbon properly, fertilize our fields properly and healthily, rather than chuck a load of fertilizer on it, and help the environment. I mean, it's kind of win-win, isn't it, David?
It's win-win. But you have to, it's still easy to be a skeptic in this situation. I think you could say, oh, that's great, whatever, you've sequestered, you know, a couple thousand kilos of carbon into the soil, whatever. You still had to drive a truck to move that stuff around and get your compost. It's not, you still have to balance it out. I still think it's a net positive from a carbon sequestering point of view, but it's still effort and it's still labor. Why should we do it from a business perspective? One is from a wine perspective. What kind of wine are we trying to make? We're trying to make a wine of place, and we can get into how much I think terroir is a misused term, and you know, people just bandy it about a lot. Yeah, another chat. But if you really want to strive towards getting a sense of that place, stop with the Roundup, stop with the chemicals, come more from a holistic point of view. And microorganisms are, if they're not already, because Laura Catena in Argentina is really pushing for it, microorganisms in your soil is going to be part of the definition of terroir. And I think we need to increase the microorganisms in our soil.
I took that was in a talk in Rioja at the symposium, the MW symposium, wasn't it? And I was fascinated by that, the fact that it's nothing to do with the soil, it's to do with the microorganisms that attach to specific soil types. And that is all fascinating. I think the scary thing is, Dave, that you and I could talk on this forever. But what we're going to do, because I think there's a lot more to discuss about your activities and your discoveries, because you're discovering viticulture and all the associated activities around it with fresh eyes. So let's schedule in another chat in a couple of weeks' time and make it a little introduction to viticulture in a green and sustainable way. And we'll watch you grow your beard and put an earring in and gently lose that sort of San Francisco kind of image and turn into a Spanish winemaker, true to form. But I just want to thank you. Do you have anything to say to finish off, or should we just say thank you till the next time?
No, I think we all. The last thing I would say is I'm not wed to anything. The only thing I am wed to is organics, because it would pain me to think of putting any chemicals on my land. But we have to take what works for each of us. And I think you in Ireland on a field that is grazed by your heritage pigs, or what do
horses
graze? I don't even know if they horses.
No, my pigs dig up the woods.
Okay. You have a different goal, and I think you have to adapt your methods for that. We all have to think of the world, we all have to think of our community, but you have to think about yourself and what works for you too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, this is it. We've all got the same goal. So I want to thank you, Dave Fora, Master of Wine.
Thank you, Harriet Tyndall, Master of Wine.
This definitely is not our final chat. So thank you very much.